Hi, welcome back to Plan9Crunch. I'm Joe Gibson. This is Doug Gibson, and today we're going to talk about Assignment Terror from 1970. It's a Paul Naschy movie. You might know it as Dracula versus Frankenstein, but not that Dracula versus Frankenstein, not the Al Adamson. This is a Paul Naschy movie, originally called Los Monstruos Del Terror. Do you want to say anything about it to start?
Yeah, Assignment Terror is an odd name. Dracula versus Frankenstein is pretty odd. This was a movie made in 1970, and they had hoped to have a huge budget. And it has Naschy as sort of a hero, a werewolf. And it has a monster mishmash of Frankenstein, Dracula, the mummy, and the werewolf. It was supposed to have the golem also. But they kind of ran out of money. This is $1 million movie back then. But I think they wanted to spend like $2 million on it. And its big hook was Michael Rennie. I don't want to get too much in the plot. I'll let you do a lot of that. But he plays an evil alien who has the idea of resurrecting all the world's monsters to take over the world so their planet can inhabit it. Kind of weird, a little bit like Plan 9 from outer space. But go on, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot like Plan 9 from outer space. It's just Paul Naschy's Plan 9, I guess. And yeah, so Paul Naschy always plays, he plays a lot of stuff, but in his Del Hombre Lobo filmology, it is Waldemar Daniński, the Polish werewolf that speaks Spanish. And he's in 12, was it 12 movies?
There's a whole bunch of those movies. This was the third one, I think.
Yeah, the third one after, there's 12, but one of them was lost and might not even exist. It's a weird thing. Los Noches del Hombre Lobo, that's a controversial subject, 1968. Allegedly directed in Paris by René Govard, but it's a lost film. No one's seen it. Anyway, so 12, but actually 11 films. From 1968 to 2004, I think. Because Fred Olen Ray made the last one, right? And that was
he did actually.
Anyway.
I haven't seen that one, but I think he did. Naschy died several years ago, maybe even a decade ago or so.
Naschy was supposed to be in the Benicio del Toro Wolfman until he died. Before he did the cameo. I read that somewhere, yeah.
Okay. Well, anyways, so the movie starts. It's kind of weird because the mishmash of these movies where John Carradine is inserted in for a scene to be some kind of professor or something, although Rennie is in the entire movie. But he is like, I don't know what he's trying to do. He looks very distinguished, Rennie, and he has good acting skills, but he tries to display no emotion about how he's going to take all these people out, and he seems to recruit only beautiful women, right, to do it more or less.
Yeah,
and
well...
Go on.
So it's just important to note that I'm pretty sure there's two other aliens with him, right? The girl and the guy. The girl is named like Maliva or something.
Yeah.
And they're inhabiting the bodies of dead Earthlings, and they're trying not to feel the emotion of those Earthlings, but gradually all of them do fall to their emotions by the end of the movie, as opposed to the higher-ups that are ordering them out that have not done that yet. Anyway, back to you. Yeah.
And early on the movie, it has a kind of House of Frankenstein vibe, where there's this carnival and a guy has the Dracula, and just like in House of Frankenstein, the stake or something is in its heart and it gets pulled out and everything, and so I don't know what this movie was trying to be, because it has a lot of the European boringness in it, all right, where scenes go, of that era, of course, where scenes go on for a long time, and a lot of this movie focuses on really dated go-go clubs and dance places like that. But at its heart, it wanted to be a monster mash.
Yeah.
Bringing as many of the monsters in. And like I said, they wanted to make the golem also, but they started to run out of money. This is filmed in multiple countries also. It was a really big effort. And it's kind of sad it turned out to be a fun movie, but not a great film, more or less. Do you want anything right now?
Well, we should mention that the golem is mentioned in the movie. There's this book, Dr. Farronk Salon's book. Okay, because here's the thing. It's not actually Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein, and whatever. It is Count Janos something. In the first few Paul Naschy movies, he made up a bunch of male vampires before eventually settling on Elizabeth Bathory to be the main villain that he'll always fight. So it's in that stage of the Paul Naschy movies where bargain bin Dracula, and then Frankenstein's monster is actually Farronk Salon's monster.
Now, I thought it was Francilian or something, but you said you're probably right. So
it appears on the book. It's Farronk Salon's book. It's Ulrich Farronk Salon. And he has a book on all the monsters that appear, including the golem is mentioned in that book, but doesn't appear in the movie.
You could just ask yourself, why did they do that? Were they afraid of upsetting Universal?
I don't know, because like you say, it's taken straight from House of Frankenstein when they take the stake out of the Dracula character. It's taken straight out of Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, the way that they portray Frankenstein's monster, half blind with the thing. His eyes are squinted the entire time. He's clearly blind, but I don't know.
And they may have been worried about it, but I don't know. The Dracula thing looked just like him. Did they use Count Dracula? I don't know if they did use Dracula's name in that. I can't remember now. I have to...
Well, I mean, the various releases call the movie Dracula versus Frankenstein,
Yeah,
Dracula contra
if you
Frankenstein.
go back in that time frame, they would throw tons of titles on movies.
Oh, no, yeah. King Kong Escapes is called Frankenstein's Son, I'm pretty sure, and a bunch of...
And one of the Nazi
releases.
films is called Frankenstein's Bloody Terror for no reason.
Oh, that was the first one. And not for no reason, they wanted to market a Frankenstein movie. And instead of ordering this movie, they ordered the one that didn't have Frankenstein. So they took the Imre character, the Imre Wolfstein character, and made him a Frankenstein descendant in the dub. It's weird, but they made it work, I guess. Anyway, so this movie has a mummy as well. Tarot Tet, I believe the mummy is called.
Yeah, for a long time I thought that was a woman playing the role, but I don't think it is. And that brings to something else. A lot of people, there's always rumors that Naschy played all these roles, except if you look in the credits, they have different names, so that could be just doing that for fun, but I don't think so, because I think I've seen these names in other films too. Honestly, when I was watching the movie, I thought Naschy was Dracula, but he isn't. And so he must have just been playing his own role in that film.
Naschy eventually played every monster, so
I
that's
know. I'm
probably
talking
what
about
it
this
means.
film.
I know, in this film, he might have played them each for a scene, but I wouldn't bet anything on that.
Don't you think that it might have been great to call this The Werewolf versus the Monsters? I mean, that would be like perfect title for it.
Well, that's the really funny thing, though, is that every other Paul Naschy film... Okay, I shouldn't say every other Paul Naschy film. I also shouldn't say every other Hombre Lobo film. Most of his Hombre Lobo films have him as the star, him as the lead, the protagonist. This one, and I think to an extent the Fred Olen Ray one, have more of a dual protagonist situation. But in this one, Inspector Tober... I always call him Toblerone because that's funnier, but he's Inspector Henry Toberman, right?
Once again, these actors that play these roles are almost like interchangeable.
Oh yes, but he's the lead of the movie. He gets the girl, he takes out the vampire, and then... sort of in the background of a lot of stuff, we do have Valdemar having his own movie here because he's still the dynamic character that takes out the mummy and Frankenstein's monster.
And they constantly talk about he has to be killed by a woman who will also die killing him.
A silver bullet fired from a woman who loves him enough to die with him.
Yeah.
And that's straight from House of Frankenstein again.
I know, it's just amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's almost like they watched House of Frankenstein to get ideas for the movie. I'll talk about Rennie a little bit. Like I said, he looked like he almost looked like someone who could have played a Bond villain because he's very distinguished and everything. But I realized doing more research about this film that he was dying during the film, and he died soon afterward. And so maybe he just wanted to get a movie in as much as he could, because he had a long career as a leading man in Hollywood. But again, it comes to the fact that this was not intended to be a low-budget movie.
Oh, yeah.
They really had high hopes for it, but it just ran out of money and backers. And also, the original director, I think, quit midway through it. It had to be followed up. So it must have been a bit of a chaotic script. I like the scene one time where they're, I don't know how they're doing it, but they're torturing these women, okay? I don't really quite know what.
I think it's sound-based. They have the thing strapped in there.
Yeah, and she's looking at him, and he's totally emotionless during most of the movie. But then she says, I see that your feelings are being aroused or something from this, you know. Why are you jealous? And Rennie gets a conflicted look on his face. And that in the end of the scene. So it's one of the few times where Rennie drops his mask of like being total automat. Have you ever seen the movie Human Duplicators?
Probably, but it's been a little bit.
It's got Richard Keel as an alien, and they're duplicating people. And Keel shows absolutely no emotion, talks like a valley boy, okay, from California. But he falls in love with a blind girl in the movie. And I was just thinking of that movie when you can see Rennie starting to lose his mask of sociopathy in the film. And even an even more ridiculous example would be Robot Monster, where the monster is like, just this automaton, doesn't think, but then to feel like the human, to be like, I mean, that's a really ridiculous analogy, but it's just the one scene where Rennie sort of drops what his thing is to be someone who deals totally with logic and doesn't have any feelings at all.
Well, yeah, it's because, again, they're inhabiting the bodies they're inhabiting human bodies, I should say. I forget if they were dead people I don't know if Rennie is said to be a dead person, but...
I don't know what they are. They come from another planet.
They come from another planet, but they are using human bodies to take on the appearance, and they start to feel human things, so two of the aliens fall in love, have a sex scene, though it's fine to show your kids, so it's not that graphic or anything.
It's a PG movie.
It's a PG movie. It's a PG movie. And so I think Rennie has that guy put to death, and that's when it's said, oh, you were just jealous of the thing. And by the end of the movie, Rennie does give up his life so that the other alien woman can escape. And that seems to be an act of love, act of compassion that he grew into by being the human. It's a weird arc to give your main villain here, and it's mostly off screen, but...
Well, this movie was interesting, and I watched it like 30 years ago, probably longer than that. I watched it I need to speak up more, I tend to drone. But I watched it like 30 plus years ago, and it was called Dracula versus Frankenstein, and it wasn't nearly as interesting as the YouTube version I saw that was from Spain, which I also believe was a little longer. But these kind of films always have different various TV cuts and things like that.
Yeah, especially when it's import and export and all that stuff. It's a flawed movie, but I like the premise. I think it's a really good premise.
The premise is great. Well, the premise for Plan9 from Outer Space is great too. It's just, we love that because it's a cult film. I don't know if this movie is as cultish as Plan9 is, because it has long scenes where it gets a little boring.
Well, I think it's still cultish. I mean, we're watching this and talking about
No, it's a cult film. I said cultish. How
Okay.
cultish is this movie compared to Plan9? I think it has a very tiny cult, particularly among Naschy fans. And it should be something people watch. And it pops up on all those DVD, 40, 50 discs you used to have. Not discs, but DVD shows. You're a little bit too young for this, but you used to be able to get 50 DVDs for like $20 on things.
But I just mean, you take Plan9Crunch and you add in a sympathetic werewolf who is brought back to life by these aliens and then dies with a woman, but also hunting down and stopping these monsters and the thing. And it's a very good premise. I want to see it done in a big budget now.
I don't know if they're going to remake.
We're probably not going to get a remake.
Assignment Terror. One thing that's interesting about these movies, despite all the work that goes in on them, they don't really have much of a plan. I mean, everything falls apart for the aliens pretty efficiently and quickly. They can't keep the werewolf under control. They can't keep the mummy under control. By the way, this has a battle between a werewolf and a mummy, right? Something you probably haven't seen in any other movie that I can think of.
Especially how it resolves. Do you remember how the werewolf destroys the mummy?
Yeah.
He puts him on like the torture rack and then wheels him around like a hamster in a thing and then sets it on fire. Yeah. That's a werewolf doing that. It's not a human being doing that. But
just provided probably the most interesting scene to people. Right?
I think much of the film flows from the theme that humans are stronger than the aliens realize, that human emotion is stronger than the aliens realize. Because it's the human emotion that stirs the brainwashed women and aliens in order to release the Wolfman and all that stuff. But there is some stuff that doesn't like logically flow in terms of like setup and payoff, where the vampire consistently can hypnotize you with just a few looks at his eyes. And Inspector Toberman, he gets to defeat the vampire. Naschy gets to defeat the mummy and the Frankenstein, but it is the inspector that beats the vampire. And before that, he's on the torture rack where the bats are going to go after his eyes. And so you think that, okay, based on the setup and payoff, the way that he'll beat the vampire is to not use his eyes at all, because he would have gotten accustomed to, I don't know, some kind of bullcrap about the hearing, the echolocation or whatever. But no, he just stares straight in the eyes of the vampire, shakes it off, and then stabs him.
You might want to show photos later of all 4 of the monsters, because I think Naschy's werewolf is pretty cool. The others are very faithful to the Universal monsters, but they're not that great reproductions. I mean,
The Mummy's pretty cool.
The Mummy seemed like did not seem like a man. I don't mean that in kind of derogatory sense. It just looked like a very slight individual.
Well, yeah, I mean, wouldn't that be a good thing, though?
The Mummy, I guess,
emaciated,
yeah, perhaps.
rotting.
Dracula looked halfway okay. Frankenstein's the same way. They look like pale imitations of what you see.
Bargain bin versions
Yeah.
for Naschy to fight.
And so Rennie, I don't have any idea how he felt about this movie. Like I said, he died soon afterwards. He may have gone into it thinking it was going to be a big budget film. They would get a big release. Apparently it was released in Europe, but quickly, not too long later, was on TV in the United States.
Yeah.
And one of the problems was, like you mentioned, they were thinking of using Dracula versus Frankenstein. They did to some degrees, but they ran into the problem of the Al Adamson film of Dracula versus Frankenstein, which would confuse people. That happens. You know, for years, we were trying to find an Andy Milligan film called Legacy of Horror. This was going back 20 years ago. And Amazon listed it, and it turned out to be a different movie with John Carradine. Now, that problem's been long resolved, but I wonder how many people bought Dracula versus Frankenstein, either wanting the Adamson, or wanting this one, and end up saying you wanted the Naschy one, you end up getting the Adamson one in the mail and things like that.
Well, that's where it's also confusing. I have a picture saved that we might be able to put in the video, we might not. You can find it pretty easily on the IMDb image gallery. There is a release of this movie under Dracula versus Frankenstein where the DVD cover box art is of just the mummy. Just the mummy in this movie, not Dracula, Frankenstein, or Naschy's character.
Well, Dracula never fights Frankenstein in this movie. Let's move behind that, people. Dracula never fights Frankenstein in this movie. So it's just kind of trying to get a title that, well, it's selling the sizzle and not the steak. And particularly in the 60s and even 50s and 70s, when you had this low budget people who are making these films for the states' rights market and out of the mainstream of Hollywood, they would just, you actually sometimes could enjoy the trailers more because it was all selling sizzle and not selling steak. They still have micro budgets, low budget things now, but the problem was in the 1970s, Hollywood got smart. They started making big budget replicas of the low budget films. One example, a bigger budget, one example is Halloween. Another example is Star Wars and just things like that. And The Exorcist. Those were all things that were the domain until about the late 1960s when you started seeing movies like Rosemary's Baby. They were the domain of low budget independent people. You would see horror films, but not explicit horror films until the 60s, really, more or less. All right, Joe, I think we've covered this. I would recommend Assignment Terror to watch. You can probably pick it up on one of those multi-discs with lots of DVDs. If you can find them on eBay. I don't know how much Amazon sells them anymore. It's also on YouTube. That's where I watched it again. So it's not my favorite Naschy film, but it's a good movie. Particularly if you're a Naschy fan, you'll love it. Do you have any comments?
It should be said that, again, there's 12, but really 11 of these Naschy Daninsky movies, and he's the star in most of them, unlike this one, so there's not really continuity between them, but you can watch this before or after really any of them because they all pseudo-connect. Probably you'll want to watch any given one before this because they all have different origins from becoming the werewolf in different ways, and this one relies on him already being a werewolf that has been put down once, but... Yeah.
Oh, that was one thing. When they found Naschy, it brings back moments of Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. There's so much of the Universal 40s movies that inspired this, clearly.
Yeah.
Because one of the best scenes ever in a Universal film is when they try to go rob Lawrence Talbot at the beginning of Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and they actually resurrect him.
Yeah, it takes a surgery in this movie to resurrect the Wolfman, but yeah, in terms of stumbling upon the grave, it is very similar.
Okay, I've just about talked this one out. Do you have any final comments?
I think we've said everything there is to say right now.
Okay, so let's remember Plan9Crunch. Subscribe at YouTube. Also, Plan9Crunch.com is our blog where we should do a review soon of Assignment Terror. I don't think we have. And Plan9Crunch on TikTok, Plan9Crunch podcast and blog at Facebook. And thank you very much. And you can say the last 3 words.
That's a wrap.